The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. Thank you for tuning in. We're here every day at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we're doing it to kind of get you through these turbulent times and help you focus on learning or growing in art. Today we have a beautiful video from Lori Putnam. It's called Bold Brushstrokes and Confident Color.
Hi, I'm Lori Putnam, and today I'm in a dry riverbed near Monterey, California, just looking for something inspiring to paint. You know, I paint all subjects, so I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but when I came to this scene, I noticed a lot of wonderful wild shapes and organic shapes, and that's the more abstract idea for me. I can also see sort of a natural color harmony that's running through the landscape. That's exciting for me. And I know from where the sun is how these shadows are going to start angling, and that's going to be exciting. And I like to just respond to what's there, so I think I need to get started before the sun gets too far away from me. Take a look, make sure I'm in the right spot. You know, I'm trying to decide, do I want sky, do I not want sky? Just depending on how far I back my eye out, you know, it becomes either a close-up, you know, more intimate, or a big broader scene. And I think I like a little bit broader scene. All of my gear really in one backpack. I can even put a few small, these are panel packs, I can put a few small of those in here, but I wanted to paint a little bit larger today, so carrying those separately. And this is a really lightweight tripod. You see it goes down pretty short, you know, so it'll fit on my backpack and not poke out. I can actually get this gear together and set up in, you know, under 3 or 4 minutes, which is really important to do when you're trying to catch the light. And today I brought my Open Box M set up. When the light gets just right, I'll stop actually setting up and go ahead and do a little thumbnail sketch, because I don't want to lose that. I'm setting up here, but the light is just almost perfect right now, so I'm just going to stop for a second and work on a couple of sketches. I really don't want to miss this. I'm looking out here at the way that the sun is starting to rake across, and just want to get down a sketch before I lose that. You know, when you start to do a sketch, you need to make sure you have the right proportions. I know that sounds crazy, but a lot of people will do a square sketch and then a rectangular setup. I don't understand. But I've got a lot of movement here. The way this riverbed comes in here and it comes out across here. There's a bank that comes down here. See all these lovely angles, and then one back here like that. It's perfect. It's like I don't even have to think about this composition. It's all built in for me. I just want to get in this shadow pattern. And this won't look like a lot to you because it only has to mean something to me. I'm the person painting it. But what I want to do is find some of these large shapes and connect them as much as possible. So I've got a dark that connects to that dark, comes up and connects to that dark. There's dark that comes up this bank like this. Oh, this is going to be wonderful. When this comes down, a little more angled than I have it. And there's dark here, a little bit of light hitting there, starting to rake over that edge. Oh, I mean, this is just a wonderful, exciting movement right out here in the nature here. Then all of this is really dark. It's all in shadow right now, which I like, with just little bits of shadow raking across and starting to do this. You can tell if you can connect many of these dark shapes together, now that I have a general idea of where my sketch is, then it starts to feel either more shadow or more light. And that's important because if you have a piece that's equal, it's just not as thrilling. There's something about us, we want to make everything very equal. And it's better that we don't do that. You can see here I'm starting to get, if I could take this entire dark section and cut it out. See, remember, this is light on a tree. This is light on a bush. If I could take this entire dark section, join it together, cut it out, or peel it off like a sticker I was going to put on my car, that piece of dark would be larger than all these little lights. So that's much more dramatic than, say, if they were equal. So I really like this. Look how abstract that is. That's wonderful. Okay, I think I can finish setting up here. This is good. Now the light can change and move, and I've got my plan. I don't have to panic. So that's important. Let's get going. Okay, so I have everything set up now, and I'm just making a few notes on my sketch, and I'll talk about why I'm doing that in just a minute. Mainly, I just want to get down a few things that will help me later on in case I get confused. You know, when you first get out here, your mind is fresh, your eyes are fresh, and you can find some things that you can hang your hat on so that you, or when you're making a million different decisions, you don't have to remember that anymore. You know, it's better for me if I sort of intellectualize on the beginning, then I can be expressive and enjoy the painting part instead of trying to figure it out and wondering where I went wrong. So one of the things I made a note about is what value, and I'm going to tell you what value means in just a second, what value out there in this scene is the same as my mixing area. Now that's important because if the sun hits my eyes, which it will in a few minutes, and my pupils close down, I'm going to have a tendency to mix my values wrong. Value is simply how light or dark something is, okay? So if you've got this scale from 1 to 10, and let's say that 1 is white and 10 is black, I know that my mixing area on my palette here is about in the middle. So while my mind is fresh and my eyes are fresh, I can scan the scene and find something that's about in the middle and make that note on my sketch. And that's what I've done. I've written shadow in the foreground is palette value. Later when I get confused, I can look at that and it'll bring me back home. Another thing I wrote down is that I see a lot of orange flowing through the scene. You might think that's because there's some poppies out there, but it's not. It has really nothing to do with them. It has more to do with the riverbed itself, when the light is hitting it, has a neutral orange to it. Underneath a lot of the greenery is this warm, dark neutral orange. And so that color I've written down on my sketch as well, orange, because I felt orange when I walked up here. So keeping all of that in mind, I have a good place to get started. So we talked about value. We know what that term means. You're going to hear me say the words chroma and neutral. Chroma is just how intense a color is, how saturated it is. It would be very chromatic. And many times when I walk up to a scene, I might make that note. Where is the most chroma? I live in a fairly neutral world. People will say my paintings are extraordinarily colorful, when in fact they're just really very sensitive neutrals all sitting next to each other, and it makes even the slightest bit of color look very colorful if you can use some neutrals. So if everything is really bright and chromatic, it tends to just look like the whole thing's screaming at you. And so if you use some good sensitive neutrals, your painting will actually look more colorful in the end. So another term we're going to talk about is, I mentioned value and I mentioned color and chroma. We're going to talk about keying a painting. When I look out here and I can determine this value of this shadow up front, and I can also determine how many steps between that value and the darkest dark and the lightest light, that's where my painting falls in terms of key. So imagine today's a bright sunshiny day with nice long cast shadows, and I know where my value range is. You don't use all 10 values in one painting. If I was painting by moonlight, that would be different now, right? So that key of that painting would be darker. Sometimes you might have a scene that is a very high key painting, and knowing that and limiting the number of values that you use will make your painting better. We really don't need more than about 5 values in a painting anyway, and my sketch is only 2, so if I can tell a story in 2, why need 10? So I'm going to talk just a second about my colors. I use a limited palette, and I actually used a very, very basic palette for about 6 years. I wanted to learn how to mix accurate color, and I knew that if I didn't have too many choices on my palette, I could learn better. I could learn the relationships of the colors, their warm to cool, neutral to chroma, how they play well with one another. And so I did that for about 6 years. Even in the studio, I only used 3 colors in white. And still occasionally, if I've got to hike a great distance, there's no reason to take a big heavy thing full of 30 tubes of paint. I mean, that's going to be too heavy. And I will go back to that same limited palette of only 3 colors in white. Today I have I have my secondaries also with me, but I could just as easily have mixed those. So I have a primary here. This is cad yellow medium. I have a naphthol red and an ultramarine blue and titanium zinc white. And these 3 primary colors would be the 3 basic that I would carry with me if I needed to lighten my weight in my backpack. And then I would just take the naphthol red and the yellow, cad yellow medium, and mix my orange, right? And I would take the red and the blue and mix a violet, and I would take the yellow and the blue and mix a green. Now these are all Gamlin brand, and I say that because colors differ from brand to brand. Especially you might find a yellow that's a light in one brand and a medium in a different brand. A lot of that has to do with the fillers, the things they put in there to stretch the paint, the grade of the paint, how long they cook the paint, lots of different things, and that varies from manufacturer. So how you're going to know if you have 3 colors that play well with one another is by mixing those secondaries. And if you can take you know, a little of your red and a little of your yellow and mix them together and get a really good orange, then they play well together. Does that make sense? Got some red and some blue, and I'm going to mix that together, and I'm going to get a violet. And you know, it's hard to tell sometimes with a dark pile of violet if it's very pure or not. So let me just put a little white in there so you can see that's pretty violet right there. If I mixed that red and blue together and got brown, then my red's not working, and I need to find a different red. And same thing if I took my yellow and mixed some blue in it, I should be able to get a pretty decent green. And that way I know I have 3 primaries that all will work. You just have to experiment with that if you're using a different brand. It took a lot of experimenting for me, and like I said, even in the studio for a good 6 years, those are the only 3 colors and white that I used. There's a lot more about that on my blog if you want to try it. I challenge you to try it. If you find yourself out painting somewhere and you sort of get in a panic because you don't have your favorite color, it's time to challenge yourself to learn to mix on your own. I believe in using any tool that you need to get the job done, but if you're going to panic and when you get out there and you don't have it with you, then you know you might get a little complacent in your work. And it's all about growing to me. It's about learning things and pushing myself. I don't ever do anything easy. I mean, life's too short to do that. So that means that I have a lot of paintings, particularly in plein air, that I scrape off. It's a myth that everything you paint is perfect and you should keep it. And I think when you do a lot of plein air festivals, as I do, you know, you're supposed to take these paintings and frame them and sell them, and that's all well and good if you have some good ones to do that. But if you just go out and paint in plein air for the learning alone, even if you're generally a studio painter, your work will grow so much more quickly than just painting in the studio alone. It's a hard sport though, I tell you. It's about the hardest sport out there. So I've got set up, got my paper towels, I got my trash bag. I took my backpack and hooked it on to my tripod in case a wind comes along. It'll help weigh me down and I won't go flying over. Brush holder. I have a can of Gamsol here. I think I better get going. Okay, so since I noted that there was orange running through, and because a lot of times we're just a little intimidated to get started, I'm going to put some stain on my canvas with a big fun brush, because if I do something fun, then it loosens me up and it gets me excited, right? So I've just got, to stain your canvas, I've just got my Gamsol and flinging paint everywhere. I've got a little bit of the solvent-free gel from Gamsol, from Gamlin. I love that stuff because it makes my paint feel really good and gooey and fun, and it also helps it dry a little bit faster. So if you're working out, you know, in a festival or something, and you need for your paints to dry so that you can frame them, that's going to help the drying process. Leaves just a little bit of sheen on the paint so the colors don't sink either. Okay, so I've got this nice and stained orange. You notice I didn't stain it ahead of time. Some people do because you know, they like to work on top of a specific color. For me, I have to respond to the scene, so I didn't know it was going to be orange till I got here, so I didn't stain it ahead of time. But if I stain it, it knocks that white back and gives me, you know, another value, another piece of information, and I can squint down and see where this value falls. If you have a hard time doing that, they make all kinds of gadgets for doing that. So you can get one of these view catcher things and look through there and see about what value that is. And that's important because if I compare that stain value with a value that's out there, I have another piece of information. I know what is this value. I know what is this value. See, I'm putting the puzzle together, and now I can just enjoy. The most intense chroma out there, I'm just going to have a little more fun with. It's somewhere right in through here. And has a real nice flow to it. And like I said, it's less about the poppies and more just about it's running through this whole scene. You can easily correct as well if you've got mineral spirits on your paper towel like this. Then you can come in here and say, you know, there's a path here, and I want it to come here, and you can draw with your paper towel, and things become a whole lot freer and looser. You know, I don't really like labels, but unfortunately, people like them. And, you know, I suppose I'm labeled as an impressionist painter, and so this helps keep me looser if I can do a little bit of this with a paper towel and not quite so much with drawing. Okay, so that's enough of the fun brush. Gonna put that up. And another good thing about this view catcher, you know, it's a good tool for helping crop. That's what it's really intended for. You just don't want to be a slave to it. You know, if you get out here and you don't have it with you, you need to remember that you were born with croppers right here. So, you know, you've got that. And also, when I talk about responding to the scene, if I crop it exactly as it is and don't put any of my own feel of the land into the piece, it's not going to be as exciting. I mean, it has to be what I saw when I walked up. And sometimes that tool like that could keep you from being quite as expressive. So I think they're really great. I use them fairly often myself, but I just don't want to be a slave to it. You know, anything that's going to hold me back. I'm just going to find a little bit darker warm here and put in some of that movement. Remember when I first did my sketch, I felt some movement, you know, angles that come in like this, and can look and see about where that comes out back here down at the bottom there. I just want to find some of that. You'll notice here as I'm mixing that I just keep mixing on top of this same color and doing what I call bending it, slightly shifting it. That helps with my color harmony as well, if I'll do that. So I'm looking out here, finding all of those wonderful angles and how that bank comes in there, and how that back bank behind it comes in here, just like I did when I first walked up and started seeing what excited me. You notice as this bank comes back here, this angle is a little bit flatter than this angle. That's perspective doing that, so it's important to put that in there. That's what's going to send people back there in the back. Now I'm looking for some things that I can use to describe the form of the landscape out there. That is the way it rolls and the angles that come across this beautiful bank here. And luckily I have my original sketch to go by because the shadows have already changed quite a bit. And so I'm paying attention to my sketch almost as much or more than I am actually what's out there. I'm looking at both things and trying to play off of both things. This shrub, I have it here on my sketch and I have it here. This is the really fun part, just responding to what's out there. I'm not a formula painter, you know. I don't just do the same thing over and over again, and so the fun part for me is this responding. Now on my sketch you can tell I've got all of this in dark. Right now it's starting to lighten up some, but if I start chasing that, I'm going to be really sorry. So I'm just going to continue here working out of this same pile. It really helps bring some color harmony into your work if you just keep bending this same pile. All of these colors run through and relate really well. And this connects to this dark here, and comes across here, like that. Every time I need a little more paint, I just bend that pile a little bit. This here. You notice that the values that I'm mixing here are darker than my palette. See if I do like that? It's because the underneath these trees was a little bit darker. It's the foreground shadows that were the same value as my palette. So I'm putting in this dark pattern here. Now I'll come back and do what's called carving the lights on top of it. So I'm making this dark pattern, maybe even overstating it a little bit. And remember me saying how this all connected back in the back here. And I can continue to do that. Looking at my sketch, comes across here, down here, over to here, and all of that is shadow. I'll carve in some light there on top of that shrub later. I don't have to leave that space for it. See, this natural bending of the color, the pile of paint, also means that you get a gradation of color throughout your painting instead of it all being boring and the same. And I think anytime you can get a gradation of color, line, edge, texture, all of that, it just makes for a more interesting, more dynamic painting. And isn't that what we want to do? I mean, really. There's only 3 things you have to ask yourself when you're mixing color. You know, you ask, is it lighter or darker? More or less saturated? Warmer or cooler than the color that it's next to? And that's what I'm doing as I'm scanning the scene. I mean, look how many different greens I've got going here, but they're all basically some form of green. Some are cool, some are warm, some are more neutral. I'm looking at my sketch, I'm looking at the scene, figuring out where this connects here, because that was important to me. It seems very random what I'm doing. It's really not. These organic shapes are important to get in. And I'm following the idea that, you know, this bank goes like this and this tree goes like this. That's the response part of what I'm doing. I'm just going to take a little bit larger brush so I can move along here and get this done, because I'm getting excited about all this other stuff I'm going to get to do in a minute. Still working out of this same pile of paint. I know, you would think I would have mud, but like I said, it's just a bunch of neutrals. You know, we have to have neutrals. So if I were to use that bright violet all on its own, that would stand out too much. If I mix it in a little bit with this pile I've been working with, it neutralizes it. But when I put it up here, it's gonna become violet again because of all the other neutrals that it's sitting around. I'm trying to get in this shadow pattern that's really just about gone here, but I have it on my sketch, and it's one of the things I really liked about the scene. So I'm gonna look at my sketch and try to get that in. Going across this plane here at the bottom, the ground plane. I don't know if you can really appreciate just how violet that looks. But you see I'm mixing with these other colors, so it's clearly not right out of the tube violet. That would not be good. And all of this was in shadow. And I just want to get to the real descriptive part, so I'm going to go ahead and take a little time to get this filled in some. I will carve some lights back in. You know, I either paint and leave an area as it is, or I paint and lay paint then on top of it, or I paint and I carve shapes in around it. I'll do all of those as we're talking here today. It gives another good sense of variety to have different thicknesses of paint. A lot of people don't actually teach that sort of paint consistency thing. You know, I started out with a wash that was really, really thin. This paint I'm putting on top of that wash is a little bit thicker. And it'll just eventually get thicker and thicker. This is looking very much like my sketch. And you notice I squint a lot. I'm trying to find color and value out there and make sure that I'm still on the right path. Love that. As the sun moves around, it starts to, you know, hit on me, on my chest here. And you notice I'm wearing very neutral clothing. That's because whatever you have on is going to reflect up into your painting. And if you think that's, you know, just a myth, go out and put on a bright red shirt and then try to paint. Okay, let me look. I want to really compare, see areas that might need a little more dark. Still fairly thin, my terp here with my Gamsol here with my paint, and a little bit of the solvent-free gel. Now remember, on my sketch, I mentioned that this shadow in the front was about mid-value. Right now, if I compare that, my palette to that, my palette value with that value, it is exactly the same. So that one thing, if you didn't take anything else away from this but that one thing will keep you from painting too dark. If you've ever painted in plein air and you go inside and your painting is way too dark, That's why. I'm just going to drag some of this together. A little bit softer touch. Sometimes I get out a palette knife and do that with a palette knife. It's lots of fun tools. Scanning around for anything that can help bring some movement back in. There's a piece of the bank here that's really dark right there. That's really dark right there. And this coming out of the scene over here. See how there's an angle here that's really pretty straightforward almost, right in here. That pushes people back. If you can find that angle in your painting and put it in, it's going to help move the viewer's eye back into the back of your painting. Now, you can agree that we can all agree that I have more dark here in my piece than I have light. Like I said earlier, that's just going to make things more dramatic if I can do that. Connect that even there. Okay, now it looks like a big mess, but I have students that are sort of afraid sometimes to do this, and I'll go back and actually make them completely mask the whole thing in one color and get their light and shadow pattern going correctly. Because there's something about that ego of I can't leave it looking this silly, people might see it, that keeps you from growing, you know? So if they have to actually put it in as one big mass of purple or blue or whatever, you get over that ego thing really quickly. Most of the time, I got this from Kwang Ho is probably my biggest influence and a wonderful friend and supporter. And he says, you know, no fear, no ego, which is difficult sometimes for painters to get past. You know, you've got all your friends are out there painting with you and they're looking at your painting like, what is she doing? You just have to not care what they're thinking. It's easy for me to say, right? If you're learning something, it's a good day. So, okay, so I've got a lot of different colors, but generally all in the same value range. There are a few darker darks in there and a few lighter darks in there, but they're all darks. So I'm going to clean up this mixing area where I've been mixing for the last few minutes. Going to actually even clean up a few of these piles of paint so that they're a little bit cleaner to grab. The darks, it doesn't matter quite as much because all of my darks are pretty neutral in this painting anyway. And I try to think of that, you know, which piece has more chroma, the lights or the shadows. And all of these are really fairly neutral. They look kind of colorful, but they're really all very neutral. You saw how I mixed them out of this pile here. So I just scrape all of that lovely mud down here in the corner. And I can use that later to neutralize other colors with. Of course, we know you can neutralize by grabbing the complement of a color. And if you notice my palette, the way it's set up, the complements are directly across from one another, which would make that real easy to do. But another way to neutralize is just by some mud. Sometimes just for convenience, I'll even put some pre-mixed grays out back in the studio, but I end up with quite a few piles of gray anyway that I can use. Okay, so I'm going to lay in some pieces of paint for the light. You know, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not really calling things by their name. I'm not saying, you know, that's a tree, that's a shrub, or whatever. I'm just looking for shapes out there. So I'm going to put in some light shapes right now. I use several different kinds of brushes for different things, and then I'll find myself painting a painting with just the same brush over and over again. Mostly I've got these rosemary brushes here, and long filberts, long flats. I use also some short flats and some rounds. And I use these Silver Grand Prix bristle brushes. They grab a lot of paint, and you can lay it right on top of your panel there. The panel I'm working on works really well with these as well because it's a smooth surface. It's made by French canvas, and it's very lightweight. It's going to take the paint really well. So if I start to lay in some light shapes, I'm going to try to remind myself to change to a different brush here just to make these shapes a little different than what I have been making the dark shapes with. And you know, the paint's a little bit stiff this morning because it was a little bit chilly, but it's loosening up some now. Now that looks really, really, really light there on my palette because my palette is fairly dark. So my tendency would be to darken that. But look what happens if I put just a little test of that on a white paper towel. You can tell it's really not that light. So don't be afraid if something looks really, really light to test it like that. It's another way to keep from going inside and finding that you have a painting that's way too dark. So I want to move people back in this painting along this path. And again, I'm just, every time I need a little bit more paint, bending it just a little more orange or a little more yellow, maybe a little more green. Put that in there. And I'm looking at my thumbnail sketch, and I see this place back here along this bank that comes down through here. My paint is a lot thicker than it was earlier, so I can lay that right on top of that other paint that's down there. You have to think about the process, you know, how you're going to put this painting together and sort of deconstruct it when you're planning. And it gets you back to how to start it. It doesn't mean that you don't enjoy some of what happens just as you're responding, you know, but if you can deconstruct it and then put it back together, you can figure out how to get started in the first place, right? Okay, so that's enough to get me started on my path. I'll refine those shapes in just a little bit. I'm going to put in the light pieces on the shrubs. And mostly those light pieces of those shrubs are on top of the path. Some of the path is in the front, but some of it is a matter of the shrubs being in front of it. So I'm going to put those lights in. Now a much more natural green than this permanent green light is a mixed green. You see, if I mix that right next to the light of my path, instead of in a little pile over here, then I can see how many value steps there are between the light of my path and the light on my shrub and right now, and my trees. And right now I'm looking at the lightest light I see on the top of a piece of greenery out there, and trying to mix that. I know that my shadows in front are this palette value. So this is definitely a light value when you compare it to that palette. So I can actually go just a little bit darker with that, and it will still read like it's in light. See what happens when you add a tubed green. It gets pretty green, so you're going to have to neutralize it just a touch. Now if I add the complement red, I'm just going to get brown. Can neutralize it with another of these colors. Can neutralize it with a little bit of my mud. And you can get all sorts of colors. Even with just 3 tubes in white, I can get about 50 or 60 greens. You know, and you live in Tennessee, you need to be able to do that. Softly green. So I'm thinking about the way this shrub actually folds there. It comes down and lays there like that. And I don't want to get too detailed with it. I work all over the whole canvas at the same time so that I can determine how much detail I'm getting. Now I just bent that green a little bit cooler. You can see from the old pile to this pile, they're very similar in value, but this one's cooler. And so if I add that on the shrub that's behind that, and it's not because of some rule that it gets cooler, that shrub is really that cool back there, that coolish green. So I'm just going to continue laying in some of the lights, following the natural lay of this bank and bending my pile of green as I go. It's all about that bend. There's a nice shrub here that I'm going to remember, but this shrub is behind it back here where the light's starting to just shoot across. And I'm still responding. You know, I can refine these shapes a little bit more later, make them more organic. Little shrubs here, little green grassy things there. This piece right here, the light on top of it, if I ask myself those questions I mentioned earlier, it's much more neutral than that, and it's a little bit darker than that. And let's say just a little bit cooler than that. So if I can mix a color that fits that description, then I should have the right color. So I'm even using a little bit of mud here. That's much more neutral. It's just a touch darker. Just want to test that against my palette here and make sure I'm not getting anywhere near the value of my palette, because that won't work. You know, you can always put a piece up there and test it. Look how light that is. I think I can go just a touch darker. Try some of that. And again, I'm thinking about how this little guy bends down here. Not so concerned about halftones, just getting in some pieces of light right now. Paint's getting kind of thick. That's fun. You know, if it's not fun, shouldn't be doing it. And I think about edges all the way through because some of these brush marks will hold. That is, they won't be painted again. Some of them, you know, will be adjusted as I continue to correct the drawing along the way. I need a little piece that's just a little bit more chromatic that I can see down here. So if I mix it right next to that, then I can tell that this color is more chromatic than that color, but they're the exact same value. It comes down here and it's this little piece right there. Okay. Painting along here, and I actually see a spot in the drawing that's going to have to be corrected in just a little bit, but I'm aware of it, and that's part of the carving in at the end anyway. I just need to make sure I remember it because it's one of the things I thought was really interesting about the scene, and it's in my sketch. I just that shrub kind of grew a little bit. That they tend to do that. But we'll fix that. It's not you don't panic. If you get too much paint on there, you can scrape it off. Otherwise, just keep getting thicker.
The outdoor landscape painting movement, called plein air, is capturing the hearts of painters around the world. These painters love going outdoors to paint from nature, which is the most accurate way to capture color, form, and light. One of today's most accomplished painters has risen to fame among collectors and painters alike because of her spectacular paintings, rooted in her passion for painting, her unique bold style, and the spontaneous painterly feel of her subjects. Now, you can study with Lori Putnam. You'll experience Lori's step-by-step painting process from start to finish, including how she mixes color, how she creates those bold brush strokes, and how she designs her paintings, and the entire process of painting outdoors from nature. You too will be able to master these techniques as you view this video at your own pace, returning to it time and time again. Plus, you'll see an in-depth interview with the artist and a show of her best paintings. You'll grow as a painter, whether you're a beginner or an experienced pro. Passionate painting, bold brush strokes, and confident color with Lori Putnam, part of the Landscape Masters series from Little Video Productions. Well, that is Lori Putnam's bold brush strokes and confident color, and you can learn about the full-length video at lilyartvideo.com. And if you want a discount on it, today is the day. We have a special discount code in the comments section. Make sure you use it today. Now let's get right to our interview with Lori Putnam. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes. Today we're here with Lori Putnam. Lori, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So this is an exciting time in your career. You have become, it seems like an overnight success. I'm sure you've been painting for a long time, but you've become very popular. Collectors are clamoring for your paintings. You're on fire. So I think people want to know a little bit more about you and what's happening in your life and what makes you tick. So let's rewind to the very beginning.
I was born in a small town. Actually, I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, but I grew up right outside of Nashville in country area, no neighbors, wildlife game reserve area, and was sort of left to be alone a lot because my brothers were older And so I just had to make up my own things to do because there were no neighbors, you know, friends couldn't just pop over. And so it was just sort of the deer and me and a coloring book, you know. That's about it. And so went to a very small elementary school, Ashland City Elementary School, and on to high school there in the little Cheatham County. My brothers, older guys, you know, they had these career plans and they left. And so I thought that's probably what I would do too. I would grow up and leave, you know. Turns out that didn't happen, and decided to get married very, very young. And
How young?
I was 17.
That's pretty old for Tennessee.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't my cousin or nephew or anything. And yeah, high school sweetheart. We got married, and yeah, but I do recall, even though I was, you know, happy to be getting married, I recall the day it dawned on me that I wasn't going to follow my college plans, and I wasn't going to get out of where I'd lived all my life. And it was really upsetting to accept that. And then things happen, people grow and change and whatever, and ended up everything getting turned upside down, and with a 4-year-old, about 11 years later, had a 4-year-old and a divorce. But you know, I got married at 17. You know, we didn't know. I mean, he didn't know. And met my husband, Mark, and if it was not for meeting him, I would not be an artist. I would still be a secretary and just sort of saying, it's okay, life's okay, life's okay.
So you weren't living the life of an artist at that point. You were working as a secretary.
I was a secretary, and I worked for what was then called the Baptist Sunday School Board. It's now Lifeway Publishing. And I worked there in their church music department, and did clerical work, and was very happy to have it because I was a singer. And so I got to sing on studio sessions and be a musician in Nashville, which is a very important thing. You know, everybody's a musician in Nashville. And was working there, and they hired Mark to teach them. It's when typesetting music for a new hymnal on a computer, the first time that anybody could do that. It had always been done by hand. And they hired him to teach us how to typeset music on a Macintosh. And that's how we met. And, you know, he was really the first person in my life that ever said, what do you want to do? You know, what do you want to be? And, you know, you could do that. And I had a decision to make. When we decided to get married, we couldn't both work there. And even though he was just a contract worker, I was really kind of needing to move on, and I didn't know where. And I'd always had a desire to be a graphic designer. I thought that would be my big dream, but I didn't have a degree. And he was also an adjunct professor at the time, and so I started to get a design degree where he taught at Belmont in Nashville. And had a wonderful teacher there. His name is Bill Hawley, and he follows me now around to this day and says, I can't believe what you're doing. But I started trying to build a portfolio by doing free work while I was in school, thinking when I get out, then maybe I can find a job. And got too much work to be able to go to school. But it was paying work. People, you know, it wasn't all free. And so I remember the day I went for a job interview at a big publishing house in Nashville, different publishing house. It's a publishing capital, really, there. And there were several jobs available. And I went to try to get my foot in the door, grunt level, you know, in the graphic design department, probably as just typesetter or something. And they gave me an aptitude test. and it showed no spatial relationship skills. But we would love to offer you a job in the accounting department. And I just said, run. I mean, you know, that wasn't what I wanted to do. So luckily, Mark's parents believed in me, and they gave me enough startup money to start a graphic design firm. And in 10 years' time, it was the third highest firm in Nashville.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And so I did that until I burned out for 13 years.
Well, that's a very heavy burnout business because of the severe deadlines.
Yeah. And it all trickles down to you. You know, you have realistic dates at the beginning, but then everything gets last minute, and then because you work on a computer, you can just throw that together, you know. And I was working, you know, 80 hours a week and having some heart issues, and the story gets worse from there, and now it's better.
Well,
that was short.
well, you've got my attention now. How did the story get worse?
Well, we had just built our dream home, a home actually that Mark had been working on the design since he was in 8th grade. And since apparently I'm not a spatial relationships person, he built a model of it so I could see what it was going to look like instead of just looking at the blueprints. But and we had just built that on a beautiful piece of property high up on a hill overlooking a beautiful green valley in Williamson County in Tennessee. And after 9/11, the company my husband was working for folded. And so we could have stayed there. Our kids were doing fine. They were just graduating like from high school and going on to college, and had good scholarships to go to really great universities, Carnegie Mellon and Northwestern. And we could have stayed in the home. It was our dream place, not the thing itself, but where it was and the setting. We could have stayed there because the design company was doing fine. But I had this easel sitting over in the corner, you know, staring at me. And I painted for 2 hours every Sunday, and that was it. And I was really lousy painter. And I was just really aching to paint. And I remember the first time I met Dawn Whitelaw. And she's such a beautiful soul, and she's so giving.
She's taught so many people.
So many people.
There's a couple of generations now of artists that she taught.
And she's really the reason that there's such a huge movement for what we do in Tennessee. Like our plein air group has 150 members in it, you know. But she has a lot of big, huge name students that she started them. And I was afraid to approach her because I thought, oh, that's Dawn Whitelaw, you know, which it would embarrass her to hear me say that. But I did and said, you know, I really need some help. I want to do this full time, but I have this design business, but I dream and paint, and what am I going to do? And she said, well, it'll be interesting to see how that works. You know, nobody wants to tell you, oh, you can do it, because then it would be responsible for you not being able to pay your bills. And so she said, I'll help you. And she wouldn't let me give her anything for it, so of course I've tried my best over the years to do anything for her, and we're great friends now. But the lady who was probably the company, was probably the largest source of income for my design company, was thinking of retiring, and here I was thinking of getting out of the business, and neither of us wanted to tell the other one because we were so dependent on each other. And I asked her, I said, you know, what would you think about this thing I'm thinking of doing? I said, you know, I shouldn't be a successful designer. I don't have really the background for that. And I feel like if I left graphic design after all I've been blessed with, it would be like slapping God in the face and saying, yeah, well, that was fun, but it's not good enough. You know, I would feel guilty after getting all of those blessings to just walk away. It's, you know. And she said, Lori, how much more miserable does he have to let you get before you hear what he's telling you to do? And I said, oh, I like your version better, you know? And she said, okay, and I'll feed you if you get hungry. And so I remember going in and saying, Mark, I'm going to paint full time. And he said, you do know you don't know how to paint. And I said, I know that. I don't know how to paint, but I'm going to learn how to paint. And I didn't even know the word plein air. And somebody said, well, you need to take a plein air class. And I said, well, what is that? Okay. And I went and took a plein air class with a man named Jason Saunders, who is Scott Christensen's really good friend. And so I learned about Scott. And we sold everything we owned and gave away our golden retriever, which still makes me sad, and moved in a tiny little apartment till we could get things sort of settled. And I went out and studied with Scott. Now, I had painted in plein air a whole 12 times by then. You know. And I remember saying to him, this was in 2005, and I said to him, I'm going to do this full time. And of course, he's looking at my work going, okay. I mean, you know how that turns out. Yeah, exactly. But I knew I was bad. I had to work, you know,
Right.
to get, you know, to get better. And so, anyway, we sold everything we owned. And after I took a class from him and a class from a couple other people that I always wanted to take from, we headed off to Italy for 8 months. So that several reasons. One, I think, was sort of a personal journey for my husband that he needed. When you're unemployed and you're in your 50s and everybody thinks you're washed up and you can't even get a job interview, you know, there's a lot to deal with, especially probably for the male population, I would think.
Sure, men tie their identity to their work.
Yeah, he would say that. People say, what do you do? Finally he just started saying, I'm a philosopher. So we went to Italy, and it was his idea. And he finished a novel, practiced his violin, you know, 3 or 4 hours every day, took long hikes, cooked all my meals because he's a wonderful chef, and I painted all day long, every day, with challenges that I knew I couldn't possibly do. You know, I wasn't there to do anything easy.
And you're living on savings at this
Living
point.
on, yeah, we had just said, you know, we're going to take this little tiny bit and do that. And so we went during the winter. We stayed in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, so it was we saved money living there. You know, we lived on maybe, you know, $15 a day, and ate like kings, and had, you know, the best wine in the world. And he would make 3-course meals twice a day, and it was pretty perfect.
So there's a theme developing here, right? It's a leap of faith theme.
Absolutely.
I mean, you had a successful business, very successful business, and you pulled the plug on it to go to the next level.
Yeah, and some people would say, I have people say, wow, you're so courageous. And the line between courageous and having faith and being just naive, you know, all of that's really close. And I don't know if maybe some of it has to do with I had no real self-esteem, you know, as a child, and I was slapped by my first grade teacher for coloring outside the lines. I don't know if any of that psychologically played a role, and I'm going to prove myself. But for whatever reason, I've just been the kind of person that has just always thought, well, I'm not going to know if I don't try. And it takes a lot of faith to do that, and a lot of tears, you know, when you're literally standing thinking, I can't, I don't know for sure if I can buy crackers this week. You know, it's kind of a come to Jesus moment there, you know. Should I stop this? Should I stop trying this? Should I give up? And I've thought that a million times. I've got to give up on this because how am I ever going to be able to buy crackers?
And Mark all the time is being supportive of this.
Emotionally, yes, but still no job.
Right.
He did everything. You know, he was one of those anything for a buck guys. Anything he could pick up, you know. And he's just never once said, he calls me Angel. I say it's because he can't remember my name. He's never once said, Angel, you got to give this up. Never once. And every time I walk out the door, you know, I travel all the time now, he says, you know, don't forget this is your job and I support you in that. Yeah, I'm going to miss you, but it's your job. It's okay. You know, because I'm always looking at him with this puppy dog face like, I'm leaving you again, you know. But I think a lot of things happened that might have been by chance, might have been a bigger plan that nobody can ever know. And it's not a plan about, man, I don't want that to sound like I think I'm special enough to have some plan for me. I just mean that when you believe in yourself and you believe that, this isn't a religious statement either, but when you believe that God loves you more than you could even ever imagine, then why wouldn't you do all you possibly can to be anything He wants you to be? And I don't know. You know, the jury is still out on how long this whirlwind thing will last, but I'm enjoying it right now.
Well, you took another leap.
Yeah.
Because you and I met originally in the Adirondacks, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I don't know, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, you and Mark were barely getting by, and you needed to build your brand as an artist. Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, to go to a place that wasn't a paycheck at the end, you know, usually if I travel it would be to teach a workshop or hopefully make a sale. But to go to a place that there was not going to be that pressure, but there was also not going to be a check at the end was huge for us to come up with the money to do it. And but we did. And I was determined, I was afraid, not ever having met you, and I'm sorry to say this, but not ever having met you, I thought, you know, he's just going to hang out with all the cool kids. It's going to be like high school all over again. And I'm going to be, you know, the one with 0 Facebook friends or whatever. And you weren't like that. Everybody was exactly the same. And you would just say, hey, where are you going to paint today? To everybody. And it was so welcoming. But I still wanted to be very careful that it didn't seem like I was there to meet a magazine publisher. I was going to go and just paint, you know. And I remember all week long, I actually remember you saying, well, where are you and Dawn going to go paint? Because Dawn was with me. And we'd say, we don't know, because we didn't know. We weren't avoiding you. You know, you just drive along till you find something, that's where you paint. And it was the very end, the very, very end, and you and I had not exchanged more than 2 or 3 sentences, you know, with 100 people there. And I was getting ready to go to the ferry to go cross back over, and it was going to be driving through the night. And I asked you where I could get coffee, because I didn't want wine or anything. I wanted coffee to keep me awake. And you said, well, I'll show you where the coffee pot is. And we had maybe a 15-minute conversation. And I connected so genuinely with you. And I don't know exactly what you got from that, but I know what I got from that was I can trust this man. This is a real person. He's not just, you know.
Well, that was your first mistake.
That was my first mistake. And it's been a wonderful friendship and a wonderful business relationship. So that meeting and that short little conversation has led to so much.
A mustard seed, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you were generous to say, you know, well, let's work on that. Let's see what we can do to work on that. And then you started doing this whole convention thing. And then you were going to do the boot camp marketing thing. Well, I have to do that. You know, this man's giving that away for free. He's just throwing that in. And I remember on the plane home after the convention, just deciding I was going to do what you said do, and had no idea how. But, you know, I had done a lot of things I didn't know how I was going to do before. And so I just thought, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to have to tell Mark that I'm going to do this. And, you know, he kind of looked at me like, and how much is that going to cost? And I said, you know, you don't want to know that. You just don't want to know that. It'll all work out. It just will. And, wow.
So
Thank you. Thank you for
you're the one who did it.
I mean, you've advised me. I mean, I'm not going to give you all the credit. I do paint and work hard and like 100 million hours a week, but it's been wonderful having you as a marketing mentor. Really has. Thank you for that.
Glad to do it. You've had the last 2 years, your success has blossomed, dramatically blossomed, and your painting has blossomed. It's changed since I first met you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have one of your paintings hanging in my office.
It's changed since yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a very good painting, and I love it, but it's changed.
Yeah. Thanks.
Talk to me briefly about the advice you have for others in terms of growth and painting and taking risks, because you're a risk taker.
I am, and I actually have been thinking recently about a blog on this, so now I can just not have to type. There's a point where maybe you're not ready to advertise because your work isn't consistent enough, let's say. That doesn't mean you have to wait till you've arrived, because I don't know where arrival is. I'll never arrive. I'm going to always grow and change. And so there's this point where at least you're consistently looking like you. It's your work. It may be getting better, but it's your work. It's not your teacher's work or every teacher you take from. And that's sort of where I found myself a couple of years ago. It's like, well, I know it looks like me now. Now we just got to get me better. And even doing this DVD is, you know, by the time it's actually on the market, because I know there's a lot that goes into doing this, I will hopefully paint better.
Right.
And that's going to be what people see of me, is what's on the DVD. Mm-hmm. And but if you wait and wait and wait, you'll never give back. So many people have given to me. I want to give back. That's what, I mean, I don't make anything on my book, but I did it so I could give back. Mm-hmm. And you would never do anything. I mean, if you're inquisitive and you experiment, you would never put yourself out there for anything, because you're going to always grow and change. At least I hope.
To that point, I find that I have loads of ideas like you do. And I find that if I don't put the idea out there, if I don't make a public mm-hmm. proclamation about the idea, mm-hmm. that I'll never get it done. And so part of me forces myself to not embarrass myself by putting the idea out there. And it sounds like you're doing the same kind of a thing.
Yes. The problem is when you get, as you know, knowing your personality, you get so many ideas going all at the same time, and you want them all to be, great. And I'm actually at a kind of a difficult part now of the career that I never thought I would get to, where I'm having to make really difficult decisions about things that I don't want anything to suffer because I'm doing too much.
But you're in high demand. People are coming to you and saying, we want you to come to this show and that show, and you could literally travel 50 weeks a year.
I think I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's got to be time to paint.
Right.
Time to grow.
Right. And what happens is, when you first start teaching or getting in galleries, you never say no to anything because you're so hungry for affirmation or a dime or whatever, for whatever your motivation is. And so you say yes to everything, and then you get on that. Everybody expects you to continue saying yes, and then you end up not being able to do it all. Just even case in point, you might have scheduled 3 workshops and only 2 of them really made, so you only had to teach 2 workshops, and yeah, that's fine. So then the next year you schedule 4 because you want 3 to make, and and then you schedule 10 and they all make, and you're going, oh, okay, that's different, because now you have good things going and things that you want to give 100% of yourself to, but at the same time you've got high-end galleries wanting your best, good, large studio works, and you're never in the studio. And
in one way, those things feed that.
Yeah.
So sacrificing those things, there's a risk of
Exactly.
not being out there, not being seen.
So the decisions get harder, I think, with what you can do and what you can't do and what's the right thing to do and what, I've always said, and a lot of people would not agree with me on this, but I've always said that if I was to a place where I put out fewer paintings, and sold them for more, and enough that I could teach for free to pass on what's been given to me, because a lot of people have just given to me. I mean, Kwong Ho and Scott Christensen have just given, and I would teach for free, But of course, when you're building your career, that's not a good business move.
Right. So, final thoughts. If you want to impart a particular piece of Lori Putnam wisdom on our listeners, what would those be?
I would just say surround yourself with people who build you up. And I don't mean in a false way, but just there are too many, you're hard enough on yourself, and there are too many people willing to say, well, how are you going to eat? Well, what are you going to do? Well, you can't do that. If they're telling you that, I mean, unless it's your husband, not trying to break up homes, but if they're telling you that, stay away from those people. There are lots of people who love you and want you to make it. They want good for you. Be around those people. Like-minded, go-getting people. And be willing, if you ask for this career, be ready. Be ready, because I'm really only like 29. I just look this age because it's exhausting and good. It's a good tired. So be ready.
Well, that was Lori Putnam in bold brushstrokes and confident color, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, there's a special discount code for the full-length video, and that's in the comments section. It's good for today only. Now, In case you just tuned in and you've not heard about this, we have a free 2-hour video. It's a $100 value, and it's called 97 Amazing Painting Tips from the World's Best Artists. And you can get yours for free at 97tips.com. Thank you for watching today. Keep your head in the game. I'm Eric Rhodes.
The outdoor landscape painting movement, called plein air, is capturing the hearts of painters around the world. These painters love going outdoors to paint from nature, which is the most accurate way to capture color, form, and light. One of today's most accomplished painters has risen to fame among collectors and painters alike because of her spectacular paintings, rooted in her passion for painting, her unique bold style, and the spontaneous painterly feel of her subjects. Now, you can study with Lori Putnam. You'll experience Lori's step-by-step painting process from start to finish, including how she mixes color, how she creates those bold brush strokes, and how she designs her paintings, and the entire process of painting outdoors from nature. You too will be able to master these techniques as you view this video at your own pace, returning to it time and time again. Plus, you'll see an in-depth interview with the artist and a show of her best paintings. You'll grow as a painter, whether you're a beginner or an experienced pro. Passionate painting, bold brush strokes, and confident color with Lori Putnam, part of the Landscape Masters series from Little Video Productions.